Hello. Welcome to the first segment of our romantic period classes. We've already had the introduction. Hopefully, you've already viewed that. We're going to begin talking about the first composers today, and got a few terminology, a few things to talk about first. Now, we've already discussed strophic and through composed, two ways of the forms for a song. And if you'll recall, strophic is where you've got repeated stanzas, verse, chorus, much like a hymn in church. Through composed is where it starts at the beginning, goes all the way to the end, does not repeat segments of the music. It's pretty much telling a story through the music. And we're going to be listening to some things that are both in both of those two forms. All right. Our new terminology is the German art song or Lieder, Lieder. Now, these songs, of course, they were in German, but they mostly were stories. They were settings of poetry, setting of short story type things that were songs that were telling a story, much like a ballad or country song might be today, something that tells a story in a song. Many rappers tell stories in their songs. So we're familiar with this type of thing. And this genre is especially important in Germany because that's where it started. Now, the art song or the German Lieder, the master of the German Lieder was Franz Schubert. Now, Schubert was a German composer. He was born in 1797 and he died in 1828, so he barely lived into the Romantic period. But because his songs were so emotional, and he really didn't write a whole lot of other things. I mean, he's mostly in the German songs. So even though he did live mostly during the classical period, his music is very romantic. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about his boyhood. He grew up, he was singing in the famous Vienna Boys Choir, which you may have heard of the Vienna Boys Choir. They're still around today, still a very famous boys' choir. He was born in Vienna, and he began singing with the Vienna Boys Choir when he was very young. Um, his father wanted to pursue a career in teaching, but Schubert was very, very musical, and he really did not even care for anything other than being involved in music. He organized a series of concerts with fellow musicians, and they were called Schubertiads. Schubertiads, okay, because of his name is Schubert. So his music was played, and it was mostly centered around his music. Um, his One of his friends claimed that everything he touched turned into a song because he was just that way. That was his whole life. The song that we're going to listen to, he wrote as a teenager. It's called the Elf King, or many times it's called the Earl King. It was based on a little folk tale about um, the death king, or the elf king was death following. The father is taking the young child to the doctor because the child is sick, and he's riding his horse and he's carrying the child, and um, as they were progressing through, the elf king is getting closer and closer to him, and the old tale is that if you are touched by the elf king, you will die. And so the little boy keeps seeing the elf king coming up behind him. But the father says, "No, son, it's just the wind. It's just the trees, the leaves blowing. It's just, the mist." The father is trying to comfort the child and make sure that he's not scared. But the whole time, the child is seeing the elf king coming up behind him. Now, the voice, the narrate, there's only one person singing. It's a solo song, but the way the different people are talking in the song, the narrator speaks first, and then and his voice is just kind of a normal baritone voice. When the child is speaking, when it's his voice that we're supposedly hearing, it's in the tenor range, it's higher. He's singing in the higher part of his range. When the Elf King sings, it's a little lower, down in the lower register. And of course, the father's voice is rather frantic, and he's trying to calm the child, but he's not able to calm him, and he gets more and more frantic as it goes. The end of the song, the father gets to the doctor, and he gets down off the horse, and he realizes that the child in his arms is dead. So that was the story. That was the basis of the poem, and he set this to music. He was only a teenager at the time he wrote it. This is his most famous song. It's young men in colleges and universities all across the world. They learn this as part of their repertoire because this is a very, very famous German lead. Um, Schubert himself lived a very sad life, and we'll talk a little more about him later on. But first, I want you to be able to hear this song. Now, it's accompanied by a piano. The piano has a very pounding triplet beat going on throughout the whole thing, and it's supposed to represent the galloping horse's hooves and the franticness of it, the movement. Um, there are places where the music gets kind of soft and dreamy, and that's when the Earl King is trying to entice the child to go with him. And when the child is so afraid, and his voice gets higher, and he's scared, and it seems to be really fast and erratic sounding because the child is scared. And then the father is trying to calm him down, so his voice gets a little calmer and a little lower in pitch, and but then as it goes through, and the Earl King catches them and stuff. The Elf King, it's called the Earl King, and it's called the Elf King. So the German is Earl König, um, but then Elf King is the translation. So sometimes I say Earl King, sometimes I say Elf King. The song is through composed. When it starts at the beginning, it goes all the way to the end. It's constantly moving, constantly changing. There's no repeated sections. This was his first work to be published. He was only 18 at the time, and it quickly became one of the most popular songs in all of the 19th century. So it is a very, very well known song. So stop your tape now and watch and listen to The Earl King.